morning and welcome to your Daily Game Face. I'm Dr. Kim Lannon and I am here with 5 weeks in a row of Lou.
No, not 5 weeks in a row.
No, it's 5 weeks.
Last week worked.
No.
Didn't?
No.
What happened last week?
It's something. It's been 5 weeks in a row.
No.
Yeah. So we are, first of all, I'm just going to say, because one, we're not going to banter forever because we are on a timeline today.
Yes.
So first off, I will banter though a little bit about the fact that I was here in extreme plenty of time. I come in, I have a special guest, and you 15 minutes late.
Okay. You're throwing a parade because you were on time. You weren't early.
I'm throwing a parade.
Throwing a parade because you were on time.
Okay. So first of all, I'm here today and I am going to go right into this because we don't have time to fiddle around. And so I set everyone up last week that we were talking this week about addiction, but in a different way than I normally talk about it. So I want to just run through a couple things first before I get into the real stuff. Okay.
Okay.
The real stuff is coming, but right out of the top, I just want to talk about the fact that I'm going to do some stats here. So more than 9 million Americans, this blows my mind when I read this statistic, 9 million Americans aged 12 and older misuse opiates in the past year, just in this past year. And more than 5.5 million live with opiate use disorder just in the United States alone. And we're one of the worst countries in terms of the numbers. So there you go. And approximately 69,000 opiate overdose deaths happened in 2020 alone. And then it's been decreasing, which is good. It's been decreasing. So when we had the stats from 21 and 22, it went down about like 8%. When we do the age adjusted rate of drug overdose deaths involving like heroin, which is obviously one of the ones that, it decreased from 35.7% in 2021 down to 29% in 2022. So it was involving natural and semi-synthetic opiates and also things like morphine, oxycodone, and hydrocodone. And it decreased 12.5% from 4 to 3.5 in 2022. So I don't have the most recent statistics on that. But one of the things I thought was really interesting, which is going to bring me to my special part of today's talk show here, is that what percentage of Americans use opiates? And I'm focusing, most of the time we always hear about men. And the reason why I was talking about this last week is because I wanted to focus a little bit more on females. But then Liam Payne from One Direction took a header, unfortunately, off the balcony in Buenos Aires because he was on pink cocaine. And so I'm going to come back to that in a second. But I wanted to talk really quickly, so I put this out there. Overall use of percentage of adults 18 to 64 years old with one prescription in a year in the United States alone, just one, at least one, right? Men is at least 5% of men in this country, and females is 7.7%. And I think that's undershooting. Okay, we're gonna ask about this to one of our experts that's here. And then the overall use rate for one prescription is 6.4. Hold on, 6.4%. And then the percentage of 18 to 64-year-olds with 4 or more prescriptions. Now this is where I'm going towards today. 4 or more prescriptions filled in 1 year. And by 4, I mean probably like 20.
Yeah.
And multiple, meds at the same time. Overall, 1.8% of the population. However, females, again, 2.2% of the population, and I still think that's low, and men, 1.4%. So we have females coming in at 7.7% for at least one prescription of opiates or something in that family. And then we still have females in the multiple poly substance use, Okay. So in that vein, I brought up pink cocaine because people have no idea. People have been asking me always, what's pink cocaine? So first of all, it's not actually cocaine. It's dyed, I call it dyed fun drug. It was used as a rave drug back in the day, and then it's been mixed. So it's like methamphetamine with opiates, with cocaine. Sometimes, not always, it's cut with cocaine, but a large part of it is MDMA and ketamine. It was a club drug. It was a rave drug. So ketamine, obviously, in Massachusetts is big because it's on the ballot right now. And so everyone's talking about, ketamine microdosing for getting help with PTSD and all these things, which we can talk about when our guest goes off today, because we only have her for a short time. But now that I spoke really fast because we only have her for 27 minutes, Lou, is the fact that here we are today with a special guest. Let me introduce her. She is my near and dear friend, Kristen Tortolini. She is a licensed drug and alcohol counselor. She is has a background in criminal justice, and she's probably one of the best detectives. She should have been a detective because I think she should have been in forensics because she's very good at detecting things, which is also good for people who work in this field because you have to be a really good detective when you work with that. So Kristen works with women and children at a recovery/treatment center. I'm going to refer to it as a treatment center. She can refer to it as she wishes, but that's what I refer it to. And you know that I've made the distinction in my practice what a treatment center versus recovery is. But Kristen Tortolini is here today, and we're going to talk all things drug and alcohol and substance abuse and women and children and its impact. And welcome, Kristen. I can't hear her.
I'm unmuted. So,
are you unmuted, Kristen? Oh, here we go with another glitch. She's talking, but we can't hear her.
No. Oh, really?
And Lou!
Guess. Check your mic selection down the bottom in the settings underneath.
Kristen, hit your mic settings.
We had this before.
She says it's click. She's very good at this, the technology piece.
Good.
Okay. So, well, while we're trying to figure out, Lou's having a minor. So Kristen would be
the one thing that worked this morning.
I know. Kristen would be speaking and she'd be saying, "Hi, I'm here. Thank you for having me." And so I'm going to talk today about lots of things that she just talked about. And we're going to talk about MAT and the state of, affairs in women and children and how it impacts people. And I wanted to talk to her about women who are using all these types of drugs while they're prescribed and getting pregnant on them, and what it does to children and what happens to families.
You sure you have the right mic selected, Kristen? Because everything looks good on my end.
She's shaking her head. Yes.
Yeah, no, I know.
This wasn't meant to be today.
Really?
Well, Kristen, you look fine on the screen, so people just can't hear you.
We had audio this morning.
I could turn on my phone. I could call her and do it, and then it would probably give
We've actually done that before.
Want me to do that?
Yeah.
While even though she's on? Okay. It won't give me feedback, will it?
I'm not sure, but
plus
she's using the phone that you're calling her on. So.
Oh, you're going to be able to do this? Let's see. Chris, I'm calling you so you can be heard while we're seeing you.
Hi.
And there's Kristen Tortolini. Let me try it again. Kristen Tortolini. Welcome to the show, the shit show this morning.
It says that I can be seen and heard, and my mic is on.
Yeah.
Yeah, Lou.
Yeah.
It's not you. It's Lou. Lou's going to kill me today.
Again, that was the one thing that worked when we started this morning.
Okay.
We heard her.
Okay, now Kristen's messing with her phone. This is just going to be an entertaining. There we go.
Just hold the phone up a little closer to your mic.
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm not you, Kristen. You don't have a mic.
Yeah.
You were fine. Okay. So hopefully we've got it. Okay. So Kristen, here's Kristen. Welcome, Kristen.
Hello.
So what did you think of all those statistics that I said? You think they ring true?
Yes, very true. So I work very closely with women in recovery on a daily basis at a residential treatment facility.
You're doing fine. I can hear you.
Okay. It said something weird on my screen.
Oh, well, I can hear you and see you. So yes, so you work in a residential treatment facility. Yes. And
with their children.
And
the women get to choose their MATs, who they want to have for their prescriber. That is not our choice.
Right.
That is, we follow the client's lead with our recommendations.
So have you seen have you seen an increase? So Kristen, you've been practicing what, for 10 years in this field?
Yes.
Okay. So have you seen an increase or decrease in overall kind of, multi-poly use of different drugs, including opiates and other things?
Most definitely. And the biggest increase has been in alcohol.
Ah, okay. What do you think? What do you attribute that to?
COVID.
COVID. Oh, can you say a little bit more about like your thoughts on that and what people have said about that?
We saw a huge uptick in the amount of people that were looking for treatment relating to alcohol addiction. And all of them stated that they needed treatment due to COVID and being alone and locked in their homes, not being able to go anywhere, except, and you could even have the alcohol delivered to your house.
Oh, yes. Oh God, I forgot about that. That's true. That's right. So it made it easier access.
Yes.
So do you see more people now with alcohol related disorders or is it a combo?
I would say currently it's a combo, but leaning more towards a higher percentage of alcohol.
All right. And now for people that don't know, because there's a lot of people that listen that don't know what these programs are about. It's not a detox program. It's a rehabilitation program, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
So could you talk a little bit about like what your rehabilitation facility is like, without obviously giving away what it is, who you work for, but just talking more about like, what people do there, how they get help, what kinds of things go on there.
So a major function of my program is group therapy. We have 20 groups a week, ranging between relapse prevention, life skills, parenting, emotional regulation, seeking safety. We cover a wide variety of groups to give everybody an opportunity to learn something new about themselves. As you know, with any type of addiction, alcohol or opiate, there's a high percentage of abuse, domestic violence as well. So we work with all of them to get them the support that they need.
That's excellent. So do you find that a treatment center like this is unique because there aren't a lot of them, I know, in the state of Massachusetts, or do you think it's, what do you think?
So my particular location is very unique because our ages of our children, we don't have a cutoff. So a lot of programs with women and children have a cutoff of age 1.
Oh, as a starting age?
We do not have that cutoff. We allow them to come in up to age 17 to be with their parent. That is unusual, right? Because most of the time the cutoff is obviously the 1, but also the later ages aren't typical either, right? Isn't it usually cut off from maybe like 12 or 13, roughly? Yep.
So, and how long is the program? How long do people come in and stay for? And
1 year.
Okay. Do people stay longer? Do people stay shorter?
We actually have had a couple people that leave at exactly 1 year. We've had a couple stay afterwards. It really depends on the individual, whether or not. So for us, they have they could go to step down from here, and they're eligible to go there after they complete here. If some don't have housing, if some don't have another place to go, there is another program that's right below us.
Okay, so that's
they can go to.
So that's an important part of, I think, just the overall opiate and like drug and alcohol crisis, is that people don't have a place to go. So does your facility, or do you find, I know that because you do a lot of this community placement, do you have trouble finding community placement, or is it pretty easy? Are there affiliative subsets to go to? Do you have to really search hard? All the questions.
So I have the luxury of having the facilities for them to go to. Sometimes we don't get a choice of the one that they get to go to. Sometimes they have to go to what's open, which is a barrier for women, especially with children, because they're established for 1 year and then they're going to uproot and go completely on the other side of Massachusetts.
Oh, okay.
Which, that takes them away from their supports that they've had for a year. So they're essentially starting over again.
So do you think, so there's an upside to that, and then there's obviously a downside to that, I can imagine, just in the work I do, right? So do most women do okay with that transition and change, or do you find that there's a relapse rate or a recidivism rate for the transition and the stepping down or stepping up over?
I think it's situational, but I also think it depends upon the individual on how much work they did on themselves while they were in treatment for 1 year.
Okay. Well, that brings me to the question is, what do you think is, or what are some of the barriers to treatment going successfully for some of these people?
They really have to work on what brought them here. If they don't work on their addiction, or they don't work on their domestic violence, whether that be verbal or mental or physical abuse, if they don't address those things, it could very well take them out again.
Right. And do you find that most of your clientele, in terms of because you've been doing this a long time, generally really want to be helping themselves? Because I find in my practice, it's kind of a mix, people that really want it, but then really struggle because they don't want to do the work. And I've talked about that here on the show many times. And then you've got I would say anecdotally, a smaller portion of people in general that want to do the work and will do the work because they're willing to put it in. What is your take on that?
I agree with you that some don't want to do the work. Some are not here for the right reasons. Some are here for the right reasons. So I would say, if I had to pick a number currently, I would say it's 60-40 right now, with 40% being the ones that are here for the right reasons.
Yeah. So that kind of goes along the line of, what I would see in just the outpatient, you're inpatient, you're not inpatient, but you're residential. So out in the world, I'd actually say it's a little bit lower in terms of how many people, to like 30, 70, I would say a little bit lower, just because I think residential treatment programs, and you tell me because you work there, but residential treatment programs give you a cushion to make it a little easier, so that when people are out in the world on their own, it makes it a little harder. So that's why I take the 10% drop down. So what is the function really of having a residential treatment program for women and children in terms of, what's your goal?
So ultimately the goal is to get them to the finish line for graduating the program and to be happy and successful with their family. Mm-hmm. Their own little family with their child or children, depending upon how many they have. My goal with the women is to get them housing, to teach them how to save money, to teach them how to get a job, interview.
Mm-hmm. And
I teach them a lot of things on a daily basis when I work with them.
I'm just laughing. I'm watching Lou on the other side. I'm like, what is he doing? You can't see him, Kristen, but Lou's like, I can barely see his head. And I'm sorry. He's just like
finding us, trying to figure out what the hell's going on.
He's like disappeared behind the screen. I'm like, where is he? He's like so quiet. He usually has questions. So you used to work solely with the children way back in the beginning, if I remember, right? Mm-hmm. But now you do more of like the combo pack to like do it as a family unit. Now, okay. So down to nuts and bolts here with, some nitty gritty. How hard is it? And how hard do you really think it is, honestly, for it, to have women in your program being on multiple medications, which is, we know that happens, and then raising children and being able to do like a job and all these things, because they're on medications that are prescribed for them that are the gamut from Zoloft and SSRI to an opiate that's okay because it's prescribed, to sleep medications, to all those things. How do you manage with that and talking about those things like out in the real world? How do you balance that? Because it's their, obviously you said it's their choice.
The number one goal with that is education.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them do not ask questions. They tell a prescriber or a doctor how they're feeling, and the doctor will give them something, and they don't ask the questions as to what is this going to do to me.
Okay. So yes, and I mean I would agree with that. Many times I have people come in on multiple medications, and then I say, what are they? They tell me, and then I say this, and this, and they say, my doctor didn't tell me that. And I say, oh, well, they have no idea. They just, because it's very common for a doctor to just give, and then the self-advocacy doesn't happen. Is that one of the skills you try to teach, is self-advocacy?
Yeah.
Okay. So, and then in terms of women who I would assume women come in pregnant and are on the medications. What's that like, in terms of educating around that? Because that's a fine line, obviously, because here the person's on them, and we know from child development what happens to children who are being born to alcoholism, fetal alcoholism. We have ADD come out of like opiate use and other medications that are on board with women that are pregnant. How does that, how do you traverse that path with people who are doing that?
Very situational, because we have some that really don't care, and we have some that really do care.
Mm-hmm.
And so we work with them to help them understand what that could possibly do to the unborn child.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's something they should get help for, because if they're coming into treatment from the streets,
right,
because they've been homeless, they don't go to the doctors very often.
Right.
So it's our goal to get them to the doctors for prenatal care, so that they can have an understanding of what is going on with their unborn child.
So I would think that, and Lou, if you're paying attention, because you usually chime in on this stuff, I would think that's one of the hardest parts of this job. I don't know if that is for you, but when I think about it, and when I, have had any experience in my work in this, I would think, Kristen, that must be one of the hardest things as a clinician and working in the field, to be able to, you being with your own children, you have to separate it out as a clinician, but still you have your own children, you know what it does. And then you have to then educate, and then you have to sit with their own decisions, what they do. Can you speak to that a little bit? How do you separate that out?
We educate all the women on NAS and fetal alcohol syndrome. That's part of regular discussions when they have sessions with myself or with other people in the program. We discuss that stuff. We give them handouts for them to have. It's very much an education piece. We do let them choose who they would like to see for an OB. If they don't have an OB, then we make a suggestion for them, for somebody that's going to be able to get them in quickly, depending upon what type of care they've already had. So we do it very quickly, especially when they need the OB care immediately.
But having done, I've done like 4 different addiction podcasts and things like that. And one of the things that I've always found so daunting about this, and maybe you do too, and this is where you're running right up against it, is that when you're in addiction, you have a different mindset. You think differently. So when we're trying to quote unquote reason with them, whatever that means to you, it doesn't sit the same with them. It's a different mindset right now. And that's the first thing that has to be kind of reined in, doesn't it? Or it has to be negotiated somehow.
Kristen, did you hear his question?
I agree with him. It's a much different mindset especially when they're coming into treatment.
Yeah. So if you're talking about a fetus, if you're talking about an unborn child and what the effects are on it to a person who's not in addiction, we have a different mindset about that than a person in addiction. And that's one of the first hurdles you have to overcome, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So in my experience, that's a really hard sell, so to speak, because people detach themselves, even though they may be pregnant, they do detach themselves from that whole experience as if it's not one and the same, because there are so many people still out in the world, even in general, without even having children, that separate mind and body from experience of like what they put in their body versus what they don't, and how that impacts themselves, let alone anything else. So I don't know how much time Kristen, I just my thing. I don't know how much time Kristen and her staff spend talking about that, but do you?
It's an ongoing conversation.
Yeah. And do women, so are women, do any women get really mad about it, or like about you guys trying to help them with that? Or do they feel like it's supportive and understanding, or is it sort of a mixed bag?
I would say a lot of them are supporting once they get situated and adjusted to being in treatment.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It's not easy to just walk in the door and be ready to start a new chapter in your life.
Right.
It takes time to settle in.
Right.
But we start the conversations quickly.
And do you do, and just for the audience's benefit, does your program or other programs like her, do you do family sessions? Do you have like family members come in and work at the same time? And what does that look like? Is that also a psychoeducational piece, or is that more about just like family connection and you know, addiction is lack of connection, so therefore you're reconnecting, or is that, what do you think?
So the client gets to drive that. We make the suggestion that it might not be a bad idea for a family session. But as we know with addiction, there's a lot of families that are torn apart because of it.
Right.
The client loses trust they don't have trust from a family member to come in to see the changes that have been made.
Right.
So we do start that pretty quickly into that, but some don't utilize it until they've been here for a couple of months.
Okay. And is it more often than not that people do come in, or do they neglect that they don't want it? They just say, no, thank you.
Maybe 30% will do it.
Uh-huh. Okay. So, and I think that this is one of those things is that, see, when you say 30%, that goes to that statistic of you've got people that have family members that they burnt out and they don't get involved and whatever. But then you also have that disconnect, and we still have that very specific stigma, or that piece that comes along with addiction around, you know, disconnect, because now we're angry, we're resentful, and all those things. And I always show this in my class, and Kristen knows this clip very well that I show in my class all the time. I love it. Is there's it's like a 14-minute clip on everything you ever knew about addiction is wrong. That's what it's called, and you can find it on YouTube or anything. But it's a wonderful clip on how really addiction is really needing to be connected. And when you treat connection as a big source of treatment, like I think this program is doing, right? It's connecting people, then you have better outcomes. Do you know, Kristen, what the outcomes are typically because you've been there for a 10-year period, how long, I mean, what the outcome goal, like, you know, like 1 year sobriety, staying okay versus 10 years, 5 years, like, do you know the outcome of long-term ability to stay the game? You don't do follow-ups, right?
I would have to say that it's right now. I mean, we'll hear things about people that have been here before that aren't doing well, but the ones that are doing well outweigh that.
Okay, so that's good. So but you guys don't do like a follow-up, or like a maintenance. I know some programs out in some of the men's programs I've known and I've done consults for, they do follow-up, they do maintenance, they do all these statistical analysis, like they do that. And I don't know if this program does that.
So I do 30, 60, and 90-day follow-ups.
Okay. And then after that, right? Because we know that there's statistics on, you know, it's like 1 in every 100, and it makes it a year beyond, like, to stay the course. And then usually there's a relapse. So and I know that freaks everybody out when I say that statistic, it's 1 in 100. Now you'll see other studies that will say different, but it's usually about 1 in every 100. So we're about to lose Kristen. And unfortunately we didn't even get into this. So Kristen did offer she'd come back next week. I don't know if she can come back next week to do this, because we didn't even really get into the stuff that I wanted to get into. We just kind of started. So Kristen, are you able to come back next week?
I can.
Oh, good. Excellent. So we will, I know she has to go do group, and it's 10:27 by my watch. Is it 10:27 on your watch, Kristen?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So we're going to hold and pause for her there because we have to do all the, we have to do all the other questions, and we have to do the fun questions at the end, like, how I ask all the fun questions at the end. Okay, Kristen, pause your brain. And then next week, when we start on time,
with all the audio working.
With all the audio working, and we're not doing this, we're going to have you come back and then we're going to talk, more in depth. I mean, we got like a sense of like the general now. And just wanted to let you know that your son is watching. And he said,
Awesome.
This is amazing.
Yeah.
And Kate was supposed to be here, but I don't know where she is, but
She's in psychology class.
Awesome. Well, thank you so very much. I look forward to next week.
All right. Me too. Thank you so much, Kristen. Have a great day. I'll talk to you later. Okay. Bye.
That was an adventure.
What?
That was an adventure.
Okay. So we sort of got the warm up going.
Yeah.
Which now I feel truncated, but that's okay,
Another
Lou.
shot.
I know. Thank God she can do it again next week. So, so I know her program really well. So I don't want to speak for her program, but I could talk about her program too. But I really want her to talk about it because she does it so well and she's so good at it. But let's go over to talking about some of the things like in terms of like the outpatient stuff and just like let's go back to pink cocaine for a second.
Okay.
All right. So had you heard about pink cocaine before?
I heard about it in that story.
Oh,
okay.
Okay.
Little I dug into that story.
Okay.
Yeah.
So pink cocaine's been around for a while. And so, and people were like, last week and into this week, like, Kim, what's pink cocaine? What's, like it's a new thing.
Yeah.
It's really not. So, cause it's just been an upgraded version of the club drugs and the rave. So I'll go back to the beginning of the show and talking about that. So it's very rarely put with cocaine, but it's because it's the mix of meth and the mix of sometimes, and I do say that sometimes it's cocaine, but it's ketamine, it's MDMA, it's sometimes barbiturate. There's other things in it, but the main base of it is typically ketamine, which if we go back to like Matthew Perry, right? So he was overdosed with ketamine. He was overdosing on his microdosing, and he was also on, I believe it was Suboxone at the same time, which is also a synthetic heroin, right? It's a synthetic opiate. So ketamine is not. So ketamine is the same thing that they put in your anesthesia when you get knocked out for surgery, or like fentanyl. It's got that similar thing. And so, and my guess, and because people were asking me to make a clinical guess, obviously I don't know Liam Payne. Obviously I didn't know Matthew Perry, would have loved to have known him. But my guess clinically is it wasn't just the fact that he was out of his mind on the pink cocaine. Usually when people are in addiction and they're tearing apart their hotel room and they're a star and they have all these things kind of like Whitney Houston and, whoever else, Prince and Michael Jackson. But when you're doing that and you jump from a balcony, it's not just probably because he did pink cocaine. It's likely because he was probably doing cocaine at the same time on top of it. And he was probably drinking alcohol. And I have to apologize because my allergies today are awful and I'm like drowning. Sorry. And I don't know if these wintergreen mints that keep popping are helping me. Excuse me. So people have been very fascinated by this because everyone's like, oh, it's a new drug. And it's not. It comes over the border from South America, very heavily made in South America and Mexico. However, so they don't get the knock for, oh my God, they're crossing the border with it. It's incredibly vested here in the United States in terms of people making it in their own labs. This is not, that's like the club drugs, MDMA and ecstasy, and the combo of ketamine and other things have been made like this for a long time. And now as in more recently, the pink cocaine, they make it pink because it was for the parties. It was dyed pink. It's just pink. It's just food coloring. It's pink,
Yep.
but it's just the crushed, compound.
Marketing.
Yeah, it's marketing to younger people. But what it does is when you have methamphetamine and you have, an opiate in there, plus ketamine, plus MDMA, plus whatever else they decide to put in it that you don't know, right? You've got multiple drugs working on different parts of the brain. And when those are going on, you're also having some of those drugs are working also on your cardiovascular system. Some of them are working on your liver and your kidney at the same time. Some of them are working on your emotional center of your brain. Well, all of them are working on your emotional center of the brain. And that emotional center is your regulator, kind of like for eating, kind of like for anything else. So what it does is it dysregulates your amygdala, your hippocampus, and your hypothalamus, your emotional center, the limbic system, to just kind of throw caution to the wind, and in your frontal lobe goes, oh, like I can jump. I can jump from this. I'll land. Like it makes you think you're powerful. It makes you think you're invincible.
Yeah.
It makes you think all these things. And when you add, and now again, I'm doing a clinical guess just because of some of the consults I've done over the years on cases that are similar to these famous cases. There's usually something else, because usually when someone does it, it's not going to make you jump off a balcony. It's usually the incentive of other things. Plus, we know that Liam Payne, according to reports, like Matthew Perry and like others, had long, extensive histories of relapse, recovery, relapse, recovery, relapse, recovery. And some people get it and some people just don't. And it's, I think it goes back to what John was saying in his earlier comment about, I think everybody that attempts being sober has a daunting task. Some want it more than another. Hats off to all that go for it, because the going for it is a big step, but it's then, a treatment team like Kristen's to help you. Like, do you have a team of people? Some people don't go to residential treatment. Some people don't go through detox and rehabs. Some people do it on their own, but without the connection in the community of resources or doctors who are not, and this is what I was going to get into, and we can do it next week too, but I'm going to talk about it. There's in my clinical work, I have an overabundance of what I see of overprescribing of medications into my patients who come in on not one, not two, like I said, the statistics are supporting like 4 or 5 different types of medications that are all combining to make what I call it the floor liquor syndrome, that you're so medicated legally because the doctors have prescribed it, and it's usually multiple doctors. It's not just one. It's multiple doctors doing that. And I am very clear that I am absolutely pro MAT, which is medical assisted treatment, to a point, and only when necessary, and at a minimalist basis as a helper. Because what happens with MAT is the more MAT you put on board, so the more mix, the more medications, whatever, the harder it is to ever get off. And the goal of MAT was originally never to have people be on it for life, which is what we're getting now. And that's the trend now. And so the goal of MAT in my practice, and other people like me, like in naturopathy, is that we work to get people down to the most natural that they can be, or nothing, to the point where they can, because the body knows how, the body keeps the score. Great book, by the way. The body keeps the score. And also the body knows how to heal itself. But it's then, like to other people's points before, and to Kristen's point, is it's a matter of, what the client wants to do and how hard it is. Like I have a client that's been on synthetic heroin, Suboxone, Subutex, for the better part of 20 plus years. And we have gone up and down on it. And she's so dependent on it. The likelihood is she wants off of it, but she's not going to. And now, there's, just like most people, she, like other people, make justifications and reasons for now why they're physical maladies that have come from that. We know, gastrointestinal things, thyroid issues, pancreas issues, liver function malfunctioning, kidney shutdown, all these things. We know that those types of medications make that happen. And oh, Kate, she just came late. You missed your mom. Your mom was the special guest, but she'll be back next week to finish up.
Yeah.
But she had to jump. So you missed it, but you can go back and listen.
She was in class.
She was in class,
Okay.
but that's okay. She's going to be so disappointed. So, so what was I saying?
You're saying that we were working on the fact that most of these types of treatments were supposed to be temporary, but
Oh, yes.
working on dependency and rationalizing your dependency.
Right. So rationalizing your dependency, making it that, like, I have clients that will find one article. They'll go to Dr. Google and it will negate everything that I have said about, yes, this is what has created it. And then 6 or 7 articles that, I'm always a referencer. I always can give a source.
Yep.
And I give good reputable sources, not like...
Yep. You can find whatever you want on Google.
Right. So when you find reputable sources that are non-biased, that have not been backed by some pharma or big money company or something like that, and you get it, you can understand that, you can see it's clear. Synthetic heroin is synthetic heroin. It's just like heroin. So if you have I call it the stringy body look, which is that heroin look, and I say there's no old heroin addicts. Why? It's because it deteriorates your bone structure. It kills your jawline. It kills, you get osteoporosis. If you get into your 50s and 60s and you're using a prescribed version of this, you're obviously, I don't even have to look it up on a clinical research journal, but it's there to support it, which is the benefit. But people will find one thing that will say, no, it's not. And then they'll run with that despite the evidence for all the things. So
confirmation bias.
Right. It's very difficult to get people to get their treatment sometimes for things like thyroid cancer or thyroid disease or gastrointestinal or COPD, even though that's from smoking, because they've been inhaling things or vaping things. It's very hard to get them to get the treatment if they believe that they have found the article or the support source that says, no, that's not it in one spot, because now it vindicates them and gives them the ability to say, oh, that's not it, despite all the actual evidence. So that's one of the biggest things I see. And of course, Kristen and I will talk about that a little bit to see if she sees that as well. I mean,
it's back to the mindset issue and people's view, which is why it's so difficult for non-addicts to deal with addicts in recovery, and why there are so many counselors that are former addicts.
Right.
Because they can negotiate with that mindset a little bit better than people who haven't ever been there.
Exactly. And yes. And also I think that when you're heavily invested in it, like, because obviously Kristen and I talk about it quite a bit because, we're colleagues. We talk about that mindset a lot, about how the mindset gets very blurred by the medical community, which I think falls down on the job a lot. And a lot of times the medical community will admit that. I listen to a podcast all the time with doctors that come on and talk about how they don't, but they're aware, like I'm talking, I don't, but I'm aware of like how many medical professionals will fall down on that job and just, they don't have the patient advocate for themselves. They don't like it when the patient advocates for themselves. They know the best. They give out these things. And when we're talking about medications, we're talking about 5 or 6 medications. I mean, I've done consults on cases recently that we're talking, the person's on 2 different sleep meds, mind you, and they have like babies. So they have a baby and like a toddler, right? So imagine having to manage this and they're on their own, right? So you've got 1 or 2 different, you got Ambien, Trazodone, maybe a little Clonidine, right? So 2 are addictive, 1's not. 1 lowers your blood pressure. So you take all those at night. Then you take some Seroquel, which is also a sleep med, but a lot of doctors will prescribe it for during the day for people who have anxiety during the day, but they're barely getting up in the morning because they're having the hangover from what I call the floor liquors. And then they're on methadone and they're on Suboxone at the same time. And they're on like a Klonopin. So now we've got synthetic heroin, and a benzo. And then we might put in a little Zoloft and, maybe a little gabapentin, and gabapentin is for nerves and neuropathy. And that's for people who have, it's for anxiety. It's used for that now, but people get 3,200 milligrams. And the original dosing on that was under 1,000 milligrams for people a day. And now we're seeing huge amounts, but treating not just for physical maladies. Now it's being secondary and third prescribed for other things. So you get a person that's on all of those things, and I'm not kidding.
Yeah.
And then they're functioning, and you want them to successfully be able to put their own house together, have a job, take care of 1, 2, 3, 7 children, whatever it is, stay sober off of street drugs.
Yep.
Even though they're on all the same drugs essentially that are just prescribed. Those are all street drugs, by the way,
Yep.
but they're just prescribed. And to not relapse and not go back out on the street. It's a very hard line. And that's what Chris and I will end up getting into.
And the further into the woods you get from self-regulation, the harder it is to return. I would imagine.
Well, yes. And so
once you've been, the pharmaceuticals are regulating you, your ability atrophies, doesn't it, to regulate?
So, well, yes. So the more pharmaceuticals you're on over on a chronic long period of time, the harder it is for your body to regulate. It doesn't mean your body won't regulate if you get off of everything over time, but the harder it is. And the neuroplasticity, like the brain's ability to regenerate, to regroup, to do the work it's supposed to do in all the neurotransmitters that are touched on with these medications. Like your anxiety is your GABA, right? So if you're taking something for your neuropathy and your anxiety, gabapentin, once you take that out, your GABA has to figure out how to do that on its own. When you take natural GABA, your body doesn't have to do that because natural GABA is natural GABA, so you don't get addicted to it. So it's a much better naturopathy source for that, right? But there's no money.
What's the source for that?
Huh?
What's the source for that?
What do you mean? How does it get made?
GABA.
So they can make GABA naturally without any of the like benzo. So benzos are GABA with the compounds structured so that they really, really work on making sure you get balanced. And I'm not giving the whole science lesson here, but and then that's how they become addictive. When you take regular GABA straight, which is the same as in your brain, which they can make because they know the compound and how it has made molecularly, it just raises the elevation up without the side effects. So it's wonderful. But Big Pharma doesn't make any money on that.
Right.
So whenever I tell clients, like, let's do a consult with your primary care. Let's make sure we do all the things to make sure we're no contraindications here. And let's try to start moving into a naturopathy. And I'd say 99% of my clients, maybe 98%, when they come to me, they know they're coming to do naturopathy. They know they're coming to try to do things that heal themselves. And they're trying to move off of everything they can with the base minimum of anything, staying on maybe a minimal amount of like a mood stabilizer that doesn't have huge side effects or weight gain, or for men, erectile dysfunction, or like there's all those things. And there's more and more people coming along in terms of doing the type of practice I've been doing for years. But this is more of a trend. But at the same time, there's the trend for MAT, the medical assisted treatment, because there's been such a push, especially in the state of Massachusetts, by some governing bodies that oversee that this is how it should be and people should have their choice, which of course people should have their choice. But in giving a choice, we must educate. Yeah. And I think that was to Kristen's point, is the education is often lacking because, most people's attitude, and she can speak to this too, is, in my experience, is, well, the doctor gave it to me, so it must be okay. Yeah, but you're licking the floor and you dropped your baby, Call
me cynical, because I am, but pharmaceutical companies don't have a reputation of creating fixes.
No.
They create treatments.
Well, they're right, which is why it's a treatment facility.
Which is why when you say that they're intended to be used for a short period of time, I'm sure they're sold that way. I'm not sure that's the intent.
Well, so they're not sold that way anymore.
Yeah.
They aren't. But the intended use initially, like if we go back to Suboxone history, when Suboxone came out to help get people away from other things, including methadone, excuse me, because methadone was made for the same thing. Methadone was supposed to help people get off of heroin after the Vietnam War, right? Yeah. We know how that worked out, right? Yeah. So it's the same pattern. So they're not so Suboxone, for instance, and you could read different little articles on the actual timeline, but roughly you're only supposed to be on Suboxone when you're getting through a detox and doing initial rehab for about 16 to 21 days. If you go back to the original 25 plus years ago research and how it was supposed to be dispensed, and it was supposed to be very minimal. It was supposed to start here with a, let's just take a hypothetical 16 milligrams, and then it was supposed to drop down to 8.
It's a weaning process.
4, 2,
Yeah.
1, done. No, that's not how it is now.
Yeah.
I have people that walk in my door that are on 32 milligrams, and I'm like, oh. I mean, it's just
and have been for years.
Right. And it's an astronomical amount. And then, and it's upsetting to the family, because then I'll have family sessions and, they're like, my parent or my kid is walking around on all of this particular plus whatever else, and they're having a hard time functioning, but because it's prescribed, you can't get that person convinced that this is not helping them until you get to the point where I get, a person that's been on it for 20 something years, that's all of a sudden seeing thyroid cancer and tumors and lymph node issues and pancreas issues and things like that. And they're having a really hard time with that. And they're trying to figure out, because here's the big piece of this is it's hard for people to look at something and go, I did this to myself.
Yeah. Because
then they have to take ownership that they knowingly keep taking something that they know is hurting themselves, kind of like smoking.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
However, as weird as it sounds, it's like, you don't want to die of emphysema. And I do this with clients all the time. You don't want to die of emphysema because it's horrific. And if you've ever seen it, it's horrific. But in many cases, I'd rather have someone die of emphysema than die of heroin, striation method of basically ripping and atrophying your body till you waste away to nothing and die. That's why my tagline is always, there are no old heroin addicts. You see older alcoholics, people who have alcohol addiction, to say it correctly. And, there's lots of colleagues of mine, we always talk about, well, there's people that can be on alcohol for years until they're 100, and it pickles them essentially. It's like and if they go off of it, all of a sudden they have all these medical issues when before they didn't. I had a client come in.
Well, that's a more dangerous detox.
Right. And it's very dangerous. Yeah. And so, it's almost like, okay, well, there's a trade-off here. I have a 70-plus-year-old person who is very heavily invested in their beverages of the daily. And I know for sure, like I've asked him to cut back just because he has cancer. And cancer loves alcohol, sugar, and it feeds off of that and will spread loosely here. Again, lacking describing all the science, but that's the general thing. And he's having a really hard time with that because it's like the trade-off is, well, I'm going to die anyway. So it's this mindset, mind game. Well, I'm 70 something anyways. I'm like, yeah, but you could live so much longer. But then you get people on TV, or on social media to be like, oh, my grandmother's 105 and her secret to life is 2 glasses of wine a day and her cigarette. Yeah. And you're like, okay, So it's really about, again, I think Kristen hit it on the head. It's education and people buying into the facts, not for the facts that are the preferred outcome for them. The theme of the past few weeks for me is people have their preferred outcome. Well, I don't like that answer, so I'm going to find the article. I'm going to find the thing that justifies my behavior when the facts are the facts. We speak in facts, not fiction. And so.
But then that's back to that whole addict mindset. And John talked about some want it more than others. I think it's you're on different points in the path. In terms of returning from that mindset to a more reasonable mindset, and why it's so frustrating for family members, because they're trying to deal with an addicted family member, and they're trying to reason with them, but you're in two different universes from a thought process standpoint.
Right. And you have and people will often ask
me, which is why shared experience is so important in recovery.
In recovery. And I have people that will ask me a lot of times from families like, I don't understand why he or she can't just stop, or they can't, and I am not an addict in that way. I'm an addict to running or exercise, right? Same place in the brain, right? But it's a little different, right? But not. But I'm not an addict in that way. But it's the same thing. It's like the brain goes into this space of, it's an indescribable way of feeling and being, because when you're in that moment, and I was talking with someone yesterday about that mindset of when you're in an addict brain, right? It's in full active addiction. There is no reality. There's no being rational. There's no, there's no Dr. Kim's 3 R's here, because everything goes out the window, because back to Liam Payne, there was no way. People were trying apparently to like talk to him. It's too late. It's over the top, unless they had physically restrained him, and that would have helped maybe.
Yep.
But you get very powerful on these things,
I imagine.
and you don't have the ability to think right, and you think you're invincible, or you think that, many times overdoses, which is, I think, one of the saddest things for me when I see people out in the community overdose, because I know, having done this for almost 30 years, people don't want to overdose, but they gamble with that one more time. It won't happen to me. There'll be no fentanyl in it. There'll be no ketamine in it. There'll be no bad thing in it. But this day and age, yes, there will. Yes, there will. And it's scary.
But they've rationalized that risk, which is
right. That I'm willing to take the risk.
Can't relate to.
Well, and that's right. And they're willing to take the risk. And I think here's again, we'll talk to, hopefully Kristen will talk about this, and I'll set her up to talk about this too, is that I think that we have an interesting thing with the Narcan use, is like people have become very dependent on, well, if I do this and I have someone nearby that can Narcan me, I'm good. And, I've seen people, and I may have mentioned this on the show before, that I've seen people in and out of, I'll talk about, there was a person at my gym who I had to help twice. And I was only 2 of the times that they had to be Narcaned in the gym, because they came out of the bathroom and they went into the bathroom. They were fine off the treadmill. They came out of the bathroom like 2 minutes later. I'm like, I knew, obviously, for what I do for a living, people are like, what's going on? I'm like, he's high. And the next thing you know, he's coding on the floor in the back of the gym. And I'm like, call 911. And now the gym has Narcan. And, I
was doing a general daily talk show about this when the Narcan things first started coming into being, and you had police and EMTs administering it. Yeah. And it's like, I was trying to question it in a way, because people are going, if it was your relative,
right,
you'd want to do it. Of course, I'm not against Narcan.
Right.
But like, for example, local police departments did have a person that did see twice a week.
Yeah.
Or 3 times a week.
Oh, yeah. And that's still happening, just so you know.
Meanwhile,
that's very common.
I imagine. But meanwhile, you get a drunk driving charge.
Yes.
And you're in treatment for 6 months, or you're going to meetings for 6
and
months, but you can get Narcan and there's no consequence.
Well, and you get right. And to that point, you lose your license, your job often happen, your loss of income. When you have this happen with like the Narcan use, that's like one of those societal like things
twice in a day.
Yeah. Sometimes more.
Yeah.
But yes. And I think that people don't realize it.
And then later it went into home, and my thing was, that's a crutch. That's everything's okay because I got the Narcan. Well, what if nobody's there, or what if
Well, and that's the thing. And so one of my biggest pet peeves about, there's an MAT out there that's called Sublocade. It's a newer version of the Suboxone Subutex heroin. It's an intramuscular shot that happens once a month. It's the same stuff, but it gets put into your body in a different way. It comes with a black box warning, which means in pharmaceuticals, it comes with I call it the death warning, right? You're supposed to sign off every month before they give you the shot that you understand that if they don't get it intramuscularly and they hit get it into your bloodstream, you could kill you, right? I mean, immediate death. So it's a chance that people are willing to take to have that on board for the month, because then they don't have to take like their strips or their sublingual pills every day or whatever. Again, very addictive, same as those, just more intense, right? With that. But the black box warning, when they give you the shot, they send you home with a Narcan kit every time. That should tell you something. I always teach my class, there's nothing wrong with MAT, but you have to remember, look at your variations of what is MAT. And if something's coming home with a Narcan box, it gives me pause, right? And I always ask my clients to think about that heavily. Again, I do what Kristen does. They drive the boat. I educate, but I always tell them, and they don't know this. They'll be like, "Oh yeah, I came home with a Narcan box." I'm like, "Do you think that's unusual?" And they're like, "Well, that's what I just assumed that was normal." And I'm like, "You need to go to the website, because the Sublocade website very specifically has right on the top when you open it up, it talks all about the bad things that could happen taking their product.
Meanwhile, if you
And I'm
went,
like, wow, they're advertising against themselves and the black box warning. I'm like, this should
meanwhile,
be
if you
like,
went to the airport and you were walking down the runway and the sign said, "We'll get you to destination 95% of the time," you wouldn't get on that plane.
right.
You wouldn't take that risk with your life.
Well, maybe 95% of the time.
Well,
yes. No, I know what you're saying. Yes.
but people take a risk. I'm going to go in a shot and I might die
Right.
because of this shot.
Right.
And they rationalize
Right.
it.
Right.
Which gives you an idea of the mindset that you're dealing with.
Right. And
Yeah.
and that's it. And they market that shot. Like you can get naltrexone. Naltrexone's a non-addictive blocker. So it's the I call that the MAT side. And I'm all in favor of the MAT that's a blocker. There's no addiction. It drops your cravings. You get it once a month. It's intramuscular, but there's no black box warning because there's no narcotic in it. It's not a scheduled controlled substance. It's a specific blocker. You have your antagonist versus your agonist in the body, and it's just that's the way it rolls out. And so, but people are willing to take that chance. It's just like the person who, puts their, they tie their rubber band around their arm and do their shot, and they're playing Russian roulette every time,
Because they don't
especially
know what's in there. Yeah.
especially this day and age. Or I'll have people that have said to me when they're no longer in the active addiction, they'll be like, "Oh, I always knew who I got it from." I'm like, "Yeah, but you didn't know who they got it from, and you don't know who they got it from." Or I have people that will say, "Oh, I met my person in the CVS parking lot, and they gave me the prescription right out of the bottle." I'm like, "Oh, that's good." Like the stories I could tell.
Yep.
I have many, and I always say, there's so many things there. I'm like, okay, first of all, you're in the CVS parking lot, and there's cameras, and you're not thinking this through, and just because they're sitting in the CVS parking lot giving you part of their prescription should say something to you, but also still, and it's illegal. And there's so many other issues. But anyway,
stop that. You're not thinking this through.
So anyway, I'm going to jump off today, and excited to have Kristen back on next week, and hopefully we get off on the right ground of time. And again, thank you for her showing, and we'll be excited to hear from her again next week and finish up with our conversation. And you guys have a happy, healthy, and wonderful weekend. Thank you.